Welcome back. If you guys have been a fan of this podcast for a while, you know that the thing that I probably refer to the most is evolutionary psychology in general, and specifically Dr. David M. Buss. So today is an incredible honor for me. I am probably the biggest fan that this gentleman has in the whole world. I've read every single one of his books, so let's go ahead and talk about it. He is a professor of psychology from the University of Texas at Austin. He has his PhD from Berkeley. He is currently at the University of Texas at Austin at his laboratory. Dr. Buss's laboratory studies human sex differences in mate selection. He's one of the foremost experts in the world in the field of evolutionary psychology. He's the author of the Evolutionary Psychology textbook, The Evolution of Desire, The Murderer Next Door, Why Women Have Sex with Dr. Cindy Meston, and When Men Behave Badly. Please welcome to the program, Dr. David M. Buss. Dr. Buss, it's so great to have you here, sir.
Thank you. Hey, great to be here talking to you.
It's great to have a fellow Longhorn on the podcast. Finally, it's really, really great, and we're actually going to talk about the football team at some point. Here we go. From evolutionary psychology, sir. So I undergrad, I studied some astronomy at UT Austin, and one of the things we went through in the sciences is an idea of a testable model, right? So in physics, like we had some flat earthers on here a couple weeks ago, and we discussed with them their model does not have a testable model, whereas physics does. When it comes to a testable model for psychology, I've read everything there is under the sun, and it seems like evolutionary psychology seems to get things right more often than different types, for instance, behavioral psychology or just different things. The social scientist Gad Saad talks about this frequently. Can you talk about a testable model when it comes from evolutionary psychology?
Yeah, well, the whole thing boils down to generating hypotheses that are theoretically sound, that is well anchored in the logic of evolution by selection, which we know is the causal process, the sole causal process that creates complex adaptive design in humans and all other species, including our brains and minds. One way of saying that is there's no such thing as a non-evolutionary psychology. So all psychology is evolved psychology. The key issue is what is the nature of adaptations in the mind that selection has created. And there are competing hypotheses. So even like just as an example, if we talk about infidelity, there are competing hypotheses about why women commit infidelity in the context of long-term mating relationships. For example, there's the dual mating strategy hypothesis. I won't get into this in detail now, but we can if you want.
Oh, we're going to get dual mating strategy, and then the mate switching strategy, definitely.
Yeah, and then the mate switching hypothesis. But each of these hypotheses generates novel testable predictions, and then so we can go in and test them and see whether the novel predictions pan out empirically. If they do, then we get a gold star. Or in reality, with humans, we deal with the weight of the evidence. So no single study is definitive. But if the weight of the evidence supports one hypothesis as opposed to another, then we go with that. So yes, it is testable, and it's also replicable. As you know, that's one of the hallmarks of good science. And compared to some other branches of psychology or some other models of the human mind, evolutionary psychology does pretty well. Now, having stated that, of course, there are good practitioners and bad practitioners of the field, as in every discipline. And so I could pick out half a dozen poor practitioners of evolutionary psychology and wish they would leave the field. But you don't judge a field by the worst cases. You judge it by its best cases and its accomplishments. And one of the things that I really like about evolutionary psychology is that it answers questions that no other perspective can answer. But also it has a cumulative quality, which is another hallmark of science. That is, we know a lot more now than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whereas a lot of other features of psychology tend to not have a cumulative nature. And that's because they're dealing with a model of mind which is naive, and we can get into that.
We're definitely going to get into that. When it comes back to a testable framework, one of the things that I love that Gad Saad, who I'm also another huge fan of, said was the idea that the belief that evolutionary psychology is not falsifiable, and the reality of the situation is it's quite falsifiable. There's there's easy ways. For instance, the parental investment hypothesis, there would be an example where that didn't exist, or we would show situations like, for instance, Dr. Gad Saad, which you wrote the forward to his book, The Consuming Instinct, where he talks about how pornography and strip clubs were basically created to denigrate women. Well, that wouldn't make sense if that made sense, and you wouldn't have strip clubs for homosexual men. That whole thing doesn't make sense. In fact, it would fit more that this is an evolutionary characteristic rather than something created by culture.
Right. So the way I would say it is that evolutionary psychology is a meta-theoretical framework. That is, it's not a set of hypotheses per se. And so all the testability comes down to specific evolutionary hypotheses, as you alluded to, with specific hypotheses derived from parental investment theory or other theories, sexual conflict theory, et cetera. So, as a meta-theoretical framework, it's really at a different level of analysis, and I think evolutionary psychology really provides the only cogent meta-theoretical framework for not only the field of psychology but for all of social science. And that may sound like an arrogant statement, but I think the logic is sound. That is, whenever you deal with, you can state it syllogistically, whenever you deal with human behavior, which economic behavior, so economics, sociology, anthropology, or political behavior, whenever you deal with human behavior, behavior is a function of our evolved mechanisms combined with environmental input that interacts with our evolved mechanisms to produce that behavior. And so our evolved psychology has to be an integral part of the causal chain in explaining all features of human behavior, whether they're currently, quote, adaptive or no longer adaptive.
Dr. Buss, the thing is, so for people who are not fully aware of evolutionary psychology or one of the predictable, testable hypotheses, can we talk about the 37 culture study? Because to me, that is sort of like the beginning of where I started to say, oh, wait a second, these ideas that you come up with are pervasive amongst all Homo sapiens, or at least all Homo sapiens that you've checked in. So 37 different cultures, you check some of the mating strategies, and what were the results that you found?
Yeah, so this was a study of 37 cultures. It took a long time to do this study, by the way. It's a lot easier to do studies nowadays, but at that point, it took about 5 years. And the 37 cultures included huge diversity of political systems, religious orientations, every ethnicity, any dimension you can think of, these cultures varied on, including, let's say, presumptively monogamous cultures versus presumptively polygynous cultures, where one man can legally permitted to marry multiple wives. So what we were interested in this study was, what do men and women want in a long-term mate? And so this initial 37 culture study focused on long-term mate selection, and really was focused on Darwin's theory of sexual selection. That is, what are the qualities that men and women want in potential partners? Because that influences your selection. Of course, what you want is not always what you can get, as Mick Jagger said, but preferences do drive actual mating decisions. And so what we found some things that were universally desired. So things like good health, intelligence, dependability, mutual attraction, and love. And these were basically universal preferences in all 37 cultures, more or less equally preferred by men and women. We found some characteristics that were highly variable in how much they were desired across cultures. And the most variable was the desire for virginity or chastity, or what we defined it as no prior sexual intercourse.
Yeah, we don't have that in Las Vegas. We're not aware of that.
Right. Yeah. Nor are they in Austin. In Austin or Sweden or Sweden, other cultures.
Yeah. There was a lot of not much virginity at UT Austin when I was there. Yes.
Yeah. But what we found is, in mainland China at the time, virginity was an absolute indispensable quality of a long-term mate. And in Sweden, it was like irrelevant. And some even said it was bad. If someone was a virgin, certainly by, say, mid-20s, this was viewed as a weird, quirky, undesirable quality. But what was the most startling to most people was the fact that we found universal sex differences. And the sex differences were precisely the sex differences predicted in advance by evolutionary hypotheses. And these were anchored in, Darwin's theory of sexual selection, Trivers's modification of that in terms of parental investment driving the two components of sexual selection, George C. Williams, the great evolutionary biologist, a conceptualization of reproductive value, and then Don Simons, also a brilliant evolutionary psychologist who wrote The Evolution of Human Sexuality, 1979, but a brilliant, brilliant book. And what we found is, and these are, in retrospect, well, I'll go into that in 1 second, but what we found is that men more than women preferred qualities associated with physical attractiveness, as well as relative youth. And we know now that these are cues to fertility. That is, fertility shows a very sharp age curve in women, peaks around early to mid 20s in our species in women, and then declines after 30, and declines rather steeply after 30. Whereas men's fertility shows a different age distribution, where it also peaks but it shows a very gradual diminution over age. So youth and beauty, and this was in part startling because, I'll mention the other one, and then women more than men preferred characteristics associated with resource acquisition, and qualities linked to resource acquisition, such as social status, ambition, industriousness, and somewhat older age, like not old geezer age, but guys who were a few years older than they are. And these turn out to be universal across all 37 cultures. And what I wish is that I asked people in advance of the study to make predictions, fellow psychologists, sociologists, biologists, and almost all of them predicted that the sex differences would not be universal, that they would be limited to Western cultures or capitalist cultures or media-saturated cultures. And so, and then of course, after the results are published, some people came back and said, well, I could have predicted that in advance, but they didn't. And in fact, no one had in the field predicted those in advance, except for the evolution-minded people that I mentioned before. Sorry.
Yeah, just to go back to what we said before. So we started this off by talking about a testable model for some testable theory. We came up with the testable theory based on evolution. You did 37 different cultures that were independent of each other. The hypothesis that you came from evolutionary studies, and it turned out to be universal sex differences, meaning your hypothesis turned out to be true, which is surprising to a lot of people. And to me, that was the first time where I heard that, and I was like, okay, wait, we might be onto something here. And what happened for me, generally, because I'm sure a lot of people have told you this before, when you first get into evolutionary psychology and you apply it to certain parts of your life, you're like, oh, this makes sense. Then when you come to this belief that evolutionary psychology is probably where most human preferences and most human behavior comes from, and you apply that to your life, then all of a sudden that makes sense also. Then when it becomes like pretty much all of your decisions, for me, I'm yet to find a situation where it doesn't make sense. Does that make sense? I'm still trying to, like, it's almost like testing the law of gravity, and you keep waiting for it to fail and it doesn't. That's how I feel about evolutionary psychology. And so I have my own coaching program, and one of the rules I have is that evolutionary psychology explains all human behavior, right? That's one of them. And that was one of the, it seems like the framework that when you wrote the foreword for Dr. Gad Saad's book, that seems to be like something that you said, that all psychology is evolutionary psychology.
Yeah. So I would agree with that. So to take them in the order in which you presented them, the results could have turned out differently. So the results, they could have shown that, there were sexual reversals, or in the Zulu tribe, which is one of the cultures that we studied, the sex differences were reversed. So the data could have come out in a way that falsified the hypotheses, but they did not. They supported the hypotheses. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that there's, as I said, there's no such thing as a non-evolutionary psychology.
Yeah.
And so, but it all boils down to the specifics. So, the specific evolutionary lenses that you use to interpret human behavior, and I kind of agree with you on that. I look around and there is culture and there is cultural variability, but we have to keep in mind a couple of things, because some people say that, well, it's explained by culture and not evolution. But first of all, as you alluded to earlier in this podcast, we create cultural products that correspond with our evolved psychology.
Exactly. Yes.
And this is something people don't realize. They think, well, the media and pornography, that these are things that are causing our psychology to be the way it is, as opposed to reflections of psychology. And, if you created pornography or made movies that didn't tap into our evolved psychology, they wouldn't be successful. And if you look at the most successful movies, just to take movies, for example, they all involve key themes of evolutionary psychology. Mating, mate selection, conflict in mating, parental influence, like Romeo and Juliet, the parents trying to interfere with mateships, birth, death, pregnancy, rivalry, homicide, all these things that cause us to say, wow, this is important stuff. I want to pay attention to it. I want to watch this movie. If it's done well. I mean, and so it's true of movies. It's also true of all the great literature. Go back to Shakespeare. Contains all these key themes of evolutionary psychology. So I guess I would agree with you. When I look out in the world and I interpret human behavior, I have all these evolutionary lenses that I interpret it through. That you wouldn't otherwise know how to correctly interpret it. So, like even things like I remember, this is somewhat personal, but in earlier dating days, I took a woman to a party. And she went and was talking to other people. I went and was talking to other people, and I was interacting with this very attractive woman. And she kind of came up, and then we left the party, and just she casually mentioned, "Hey, did you notice that her thighs were heavy? That woman you were talking to?" And I hadn't noticed it, but what caused me to next time I saw the woman, I was particularly attentive. Well, it turns out, she was right. Her thighs are heavy. I hadn't noticed it. But it was kind of a fascinating thing in verbal derogation of competitors. And in our studies, we found precisely that women tended to derogate other women on their physical attributes as well as their sexual promiscuity.
That's incredible. Travis, I got David Buss to tell a dating story. I'm so happy right now. You have no idea. Can we talk about this? So again, this is another topic that between you and Dr. Saad, where we go over often about the difference between what the social sciences believe and what evolutionary psychology believes. Can you talk about some of the myths? So like, for instance, one of the myths would be that this is a science that was created to define sex gender roles, but yet in fact, this science was some of the founders of it, many of them were female.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So yeah, Lita Cosmides, Margot Wilson, Sarah Hurdy, there are a few examples of that. But yeah, well, so one way to contrast it is when I was in graduate school, one of my mentors, I had about 5 mentors, which I recommend everybody do. You have multiple mentors, but one was a woman named Jean Block, and her view was basically a blank slate view of sex differences. She called it the pinks and the blues. And the reason, if you found any sex differences, then they were due to parents dressing boys up in blue, giving them toy guns and trucks, and dressing girls up in pink and giving them Barbie dolls. And that all the sex difference, so it was basically humans are blank slates, and these sex differentiated socialization practices cause all the subsequent sex differences. And she even did a science documentary called The Pinks and the Blues. Well, none of this made sense to me even back then. But what it turns out, even at that level, if you look at the socialization practices, you go up to most boys and try to dress them in pink and give them Barbie dolls. They're uninterested. They don't want to play with the Barbie dolls. They want to dress in blue and play with guns and engage in rough and tumble play and all these other things. So So the standard social science model historically has been one of a blank slate model, where the parents, the culture, the socialization, the teachers create the causal forces that mold the clay, this blank slate clay of the human mind. And evolutionary psychology, basically the model is, no, that would be absurd. We come into the world equipped with adaptations to solve problems of survival and problems of reproduction. And it is the unpacking of that psychology of problems of survival and problems of reproduction that the field is all about.
That's absolutely incredible. Dr. Buss, I'm curious if you are aware of your effect on the dating and seduction communities right now. In the beginning of your book, When Men Behave Badly, you do make reference to incels and I believe the Manosphere. Is that correct? I think you do that in the first couple chapters.
Yes.
I don't know. So I listen, Dr. Buss, you're the theoretical physicist and I'm the experimental physicist. I'm out here in these streets, right? So I see how these things are perceived in real life. I live in Las Vegas. I correspond every once in a while with Satoshi Kanazawa, who is one of Dr. Gad Saad's friends. And he wrote the book, Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters. And I used to tell him all the time, I was like, the ultimate evolutionary psychology experiment is Las Vegas, Nevada. It's the blondest girls with the skinniest waists and the guys with the Lamborghinis, spending the most money, betting the highest amount at the poker tables. Like, this is the ultimate like show of display of status is Las Vegas, Nevada, with the bottle service and the $100,000 minimums and all that kind of stuff. So one of the things I think is interesting is that the way you mentioned before, there are people in evolutionary psychology you wish you would get out. And I'm curious, are these the people that you're talking about, like the MGTOW, incel, red pill community? Is that what you're referring to?
No, not really. And I confess I have not tracked these communities carefully, and so I don't consider myself an expert at all on them. I do think that that understanding these communities, for example, the rage of incels and the anger they experience, it goes back a long way. You can quote, I don't know how many of the younger generation knows this band called The Doors. With this guy named Jim
Of course,
Morrison.
we know about The Doors.
But Jim Morrison had this lyric in, I think it was off the Strange Days album, where he said, women seem wicked when you're unwanted.
Yes.
And that kind of captures this notion that men who are spurned by women, ignored by women, shunned by women, shot down by women, sometimes develop an anger toward women. And that kind of Jim Morrison kind of captured one of the psychological pieces of that. But no, when I talk about, I'm really talking about scientists or practitioners of evolutionary psychology, not people who use it in these communities. And I would say I'm somewhat aware or dimly aware of these different communities. I've given a couple of talks to dating guru groups and so forth. But I don't consider myself an expert on those, and I basically follow the scientific literature, not the applications of.
Yeah, I will say, as far as the scientific literature from the dating community, you are one of the leading people that individuals will quote. And I actually, Rollo Tomasi, who he wrote a book called The Rational Male, because you called out Red Pill and Manosphere, and that's what he was a part of, he sent the book back. And I thought that was really funny. I think your book is absolutely fantastic, but it was just an interesting thing. Even though you may not be aware of them, they are very aware of you, sir. I just wanted to let you know that a lot of the people in that community are they know all about Dr. David Buss. So going on into that. So here's another thing. So the way it was explained to me is the word preselection. And I don't know if you've ever heard that term used for it. The way you use it, though, you say mate choice copying. And this is to be sir, right now, I will say, as far as dating in 2021, that mate choice copying thing that I don't think you really mentioned much of it in The Evolution of Desire. But the idea of having women around to make you more attractive to women is probably the single most pervasive thing in my life personally. I host a bunch of bikini competitions. I host a bunch of beauty pageants here in Las Vegas. And I will say, like, you mentioned before, you had a colleague who was very attracted to the organizer of an event, and then later on was like, I don't know why I found this individual attractive.
Right.
I will tell you that when I'm on set, so about 48 hours ago, we raised probably 2 18-wheelers worth of toys for a homeless shelter. And we did it, and all of the people who were coming to help us raise it were Playboy models, FHM models, Maxim models, who got people to buy tickets and then to bring toys. And we had massive amounts of toys from that. From that situation, I was the host. And when I'm on stage, I feel like Leonardo DiCaprio. Later on, I don't. I realize that this, it's sort of artificial. But that idea, we call it pre-selection. You call it mate choice copying. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So basically, women view a man as more attractive if other women find the man attractive. So we've, in our studies in our lab, we even just putting an attractive woman standing next to a guy causes women to rate the guy as more attractive compared to him standing there alone. And part of it is that it's pre-selection, but also it's acute to status, because status is partly determined by what we can call the attention structure. That is, the high status males are the ones to whom the most people pay the most attention. And so when you're the organizer, when you're, say, of these events, you are the center of the attention structure, and then surrounded by attractive women. So you have two things going for you. One is the mate choice copying or pre-selection phenomenon, and the other is the attention structure. So you got it both. You got it going on from both fronts.
Yeah, it's absolutely, Dr. Butts, it's indescribable. There's a social media influencer who came on here, Dan Bilzerian, about 10 weeks ago, and he has about 32 million followers on Instagram, and I hang out with him sometimes, and I watch women physically fight just to be around this guy. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. I would very much like for you to meet him at some point. But the interesting thing is, he said this before, where it's a situation where, I've experienced this when I walk into a nightclub with 2 girls. Like, nobody really wants to talk to me. When I walk in with 20 girls, everyone wants to know who I am. I find people, just random women, coming up and talking to me. So pre-selection, or rather mate choice copying, seems to be like one of the most prevalent things that I've seen physically. And the other thing that I wanted to go over when it comes to that with the mate choice copying is the ability to show that on social media. I feel like right now, the ability to show status, and you said before you're going to write a book coming up on status specifically.
Right.
The ability to show status in the modern environment, and by the way, the modern environment from the time you wrote The Evolution of Desire to right now has changed. Social media has got to the point where my ability to show status is almost entirely from social media. It's gotten to the point now where literally you see the most desirable men are literally showing their ability to attract women almost entirely comes from social media. Have you done any studies so far into this?
No, I haven't. But that's a good clue to follow up on. I mean, things have changed so rapidly. I mean, 20 years ago, there really was no social media to speak of. So, but we would expect it. I mean, I don't know. So yeah, if you have 1 million followers, but also one of the things that we have found, and I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because, as I said, this is my next book, but is that it's not just, it's keys to status also involve showing high levels of competence and ability to generate benefits. And so if you have someone like, I don't know, Leonardo DiCaprio might be an example of that. I don't know if he's even on Instagram or followers, but he's very attractive to women. Why is he attracted to women? Well, he's a great actor. He has high status. He commands a high salary. And he's a central part of the attention structure. And so even if he had 0 Instagram followers, I think he would do quite well in the mating market. But it's really interesting. Your point is really interesting that number of followers might be acute. I mean, that's a directly testable hypothesis.
It is, although I will say it was probably more testable about 5 or 6 years ago because so many people buy fake followers now. This is a very common thing. Also, there's verification on these different platforms like on Twitter and on Instagram. The blue check mark. The blue check mark is also purchasable. Instagram won't admit it, but it is. You can actually spend $5 or $10,000 and get a verification badge. Dr. Buss, you have so much. You have so many published works. I'm sure you will have no trouble at all getting a blue check mark. But the other thing is that I thought was interesting is that you had made references before to opposite sex friendships, and this is something that's also very controversial amongst people in different dating communities. The idea that can you have platonic friendships between men and women. From my personal standpoint, I found that opposite sex friendships has probably been the most beneficial thing in the world to me when it comes to dating because of the mate copying strategy. So for instance, I will have a ton, my birthday, I had 22 women show up. It was me and 22 girls. There was nobody else. It was just, we show up and guess what, Dr. Buss, I'll show you a picture. They all wore burnt orange. And they didn't even tell me. They wore burnt orange because I'm a Longhorn, and I work in animal rescue, so they all wore cat ears for me. So they show up like that. I walk in, it's me, and I've got cat ears on. I got 22 women behind me with burnt orange on, right? Going hook 'em horns. And we walk into this nightclub in Las Vegas, and I will tell you, I'm not dating most of these women. They're friends of mine, and they bring their friends along, and everyone's like, well, I'm comfortable with Michael, so you're comfortable with Michael, so let's all just go and hang out at this thing together. When I go, there's certain parties I go to, like I recruit for the Maxim parties. You wear Maxim magazine. I'm the host for some of the Maxim parties, and when I go there, I bring 100 women with me, and it's easier for me to bring 100 than it is for me to bring 10 because it becomes this sort of exponential thing. When I bring 50, another 50 are curious. Wait, how you guys are all going to this? Oh, so-and-so's going, the mean girls are going, the popular girls are going. Okay, now we're all going to go. And it becomes this almost what a critical mass that happens. And then all of a sudden, the party that I'm going to, because it doesn't work where you have a cool party and then a cool party and then a cool party. It's like one party dominates all the rest of them, and then everything else is secondary. And so that's what I found when it comes to status. That's kind of how it works. Status is not distributed evenly. There's some people up at the top, like you mentioned, Leonardo DiCaprio, that have massive amounts of status, and then secondary to them, you just find a huge drop off, right? And so that's what I found. It's almost like you get the most, like if you walk into the club with 20 girls, it's just an incredible amount of status that is conferred upon you, and people question like, who is this guy walking in here with this? Right. So that's an amazing thing. But the way I would show that is by having a ton of opposite sex friends. So there's theories about same sex friends and opposite sex friends in evolutionary psychology.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, can men and women be just friends? Of course, the answer is yes, and it's a good strategy. I mean, women partly look at men and evaluate them. Does this guy get along well with women? Does he have platonic friends? Okay. However, for some, there's a conflict that develops, and that is that men are more likely to become attracted to, sexually or romantically attracted to, their opposite sex friend. And if that attraction is not reciprocated, then that can cause conflict in the friendship and sometimes termination of the friendship. But cultivating female friends, women look at guys who get along well with women, have female friends, because that's another stamp of approval, or what word did you use? Pre-screening. Pre-selection, absolutely. Pre-selection.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. I think one of the things, Dr. Buss, that causes men to be able to, the thing you just mentioned before about falling for your female friends, right? So I think just to use some colloquialisms, right? It's called being put in the friend zone, right? The friend zone would be a situation where I'm a man attracted to a woman, she's not attracted to me, and so I go ahead and accept a role of friendship as opposed to being like a suitable sexual partner for her. And so I've been put in the friend zone. What I recommend to men is, no, you friend zone every woman you meet. Friend zone all of them. Then when you go to a party with 60, 70 girls, they're not friend zoning you. Then it quite goes the opposite direction, and it becomes a function of, it's me, and I'm with 30, 40 girls, and now it becomes intersexual selection amongst the women. That's
right, exactly. They're competing for your attention.
Correct. And that's the thing that I've noticed to be absolutely positively a cheat code. The most devastating thing that I've seen in dating is specifically is that one thing, and it's put together again by female friends and through social media. Social media is just absolutely changed the game. I'm 44 years old. I absolutely remember being at 21st and Speedway, walking around Jester Center, right? That's the massive dormitories there at UT Austin, and I, you know what? Ricky Williams was in there same time I was, the Heisman Trophy winner, and let me tell you something. He got a lot more attention from the females than I did when he was there, right? It was, and I could clearly see the level of status that happened, but it was in real life. And later on, because of social media, it allows you to be able to pervade status, by the way, falsely. And we talk about this before, how we'll get into the Dark Triad later, about the men's ability on social media to show fake signs of status or lie about their height or their income or stuff like that. Well, we'll get into that in just a second. But the other thing is I wanted to talk about the dual mating strategy versus the mate switching strategy. This is something, Dr. Buss, when I talk to some of my female friends, they have a hard time with, because I'm still back and trying to explain to them that monogamy might not be the natural state for Homo sapiens. And then when we start talking about a mate switching strategy, that is kind of mind blowing for them. So can you go over initially your hypothesis about dualistic or the dual mating strategy, and then you're switching over to the mate switching strategy?
Yes. Yeah. Switching to the mate switching.
Yeah.
Like that. So the issue, so why men have affairs. So men in committed marriages or relationships, why do they have affairs is fairly straightforward from an evolutionary perspective. The dominant motivation is desire for sexual variety, sheer novelty. It's a woman you haven't slept with. The opportunity presented itself, and men are very attuned to sexual opportunities, especially when they're low risk and low cost and don't involve, encumbering, entangling alliances. Now, why women have affairs is a more interesting question, because their desire for sexual variety, while it exists, is not as great as men's desire for sexual variety. And fewer women who say that when you ask, why did you have an affair? They don't say, oh, well, the opportunity presented itself, or there was a novel guy I wanted to sleep with, or just sheer sexual gratification. They rarely mention that. Okay. So why do women do it? This is a puzzle. One hypothesis is the dual mating strategy hypothesis, and this is put forward by excellent evolutionary psychologists, Steve Gangestad, Randy Thornhill, Marty Hazelton, who was a former student of mine, now an eminent professor at UCLA. And the dual mating strategy hypothesis is basically that women get investment from one guy and good genes from another guy. And what that implies, the clear prediction from that, is that when women are ovulating, that is, women not on the pill, not on hormonal contraceptives, when women are ovulating, that's when they're going to have sex with the guy who has good genes. And then when they're not ovulating, they'll have sex with their regular partner who has good dad qualities, high investment proclivities, but not perhaps the best genes.
So the way I've explained this to my friends is she marries the accountant and sleeps with the bartender.
Or I would put it that she marries the guy who's going to be a good dad.
Yes.
And a Boy Scout, honest, reliable, dependable, or whatever. And she wants to have sex with the bad boy.
Yes.
The exciting, good-looking, slightly arrogant, risk-taking guy. Who has more masculine features, perhaps more symmetrical features. So anyway, that's the dual mating strategy. So, and in an ideal world, it's actually a good mating strategy if it could work. So that is, you get, because often the guys who are, sometimes it's referred to as the cads versus the dads,
right?
In mate selection. But the problem with it is that, well, there's several problems. One is that the early studies showed these strong ovulation effects, such that when women are ovulating, they prefer more masculine, more symmetrical guys. But in recent years, in the last few years even, larger scale studies done in Europe, UK, and Germany have found either no effects, so that it's failure to replicate, or weaker effects. And that's one of the key sources of evidence for the dual mating strategy.
Before you go on, let's go back to the beginning where I said a testable framework for human for human psychology, and that now here was a a situation to falsify something that you believed previously, and you've taken in new information, and now the hypothesis has changed. And this is what I want to talk about before. And so now we move forward with the testable framework has now switched because new information has come in. Just to for those of you who think that this is some dogma, it is not. It is a testable framework, and as new information comes in, then the hypothesis change. This is a great example of it. Anyway, go.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a perfect example. So what I argue in my new book is that the mate switching hypothesis is a more tenable hypothesis for why women have affairs. So what's the evidence for this? Well, for one thing, women who have affairs tend to be dissatisfied with their primary relationship, both sexually dissatisfied and emotionally dissatisfied. Now, this may seem like the most obvious thing in the world. Well, of course, people who have affairs are unhappy with their relationship. But the interesting thing is it's true for women, but not true for men. So if you compare men who have affairs versus men who don't have affairs, there's no difference in their marital or relationship happiness. But there is for women. Women who have affairs are much more unhappy, and women who don't have affairs are much happier in their relationship. Okay, second is that women who have affairs, in sharp contrast to men, majority of them fall in love with or become emotionally attached to their affair partner. Now, if all you're wanting, if all a woman is wanting from a guy is good genes, she wants to ovulate, get the good genes, and then get out of Dodge, then falling in love with her, becoming attached to this affair partner is a terrible solution. What you want is you want to maintain your secure attachment to the high investing good dad, have sex with the good genes guy, and that's it. And so you combine these two, women are falling in love with their affair partners, and they're unhappy with their primary partners. This suggests to me one of a couple of variants of the mate switching. Okay, one is women have affairs to cultivate mate insurance. So something like we have car insurance, we have house insurance. If something bad might happen to our car or house, we have mate insurance because something bad might happen to our regular mateship. And we know over evolutionary time, a primary mate could get injured, could get killed, could get suffer a blow to his status, etc.
Or the tribe was conquered by another tribe. When you think about when I bring this up to women sometimes or to men, and it's a very dark way to look at Homo sapien evolution. But when you think about even Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan at one point, I believe it killed 10% of the human population. And if you think about women in those periods, what was more adaptive? The woman who would take on a new partner, or the woman who wouldn't? The woman who wouldn't was not one of our ancestors, and that was one of the problems. Is like the adaptive nature of losing your male partner to war, to violence, or to a hunting accident throughout the ancestral period. That would be something that would be adaptive. So the idea of a woman being able to switch mates, or even men for that matter too, would be something that would be adaptive.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that over human evolutionary history, intergroup warfare has been very common, as well as even within group violence. People within groups get into club fights. They have duels. They have and so they can get injured. So mate insurance, trading up. Women can use affairs to trade up to a better partner. So her current mate might have lost mate value. So he loses his job. He's no longer a good provider, or he becomes an alcoholic or addicted to drugs, and or he becomes abusive. And so mate switching, trading up to a higher mate value partner, or even using the affair as a way to transition back into the mating pool to see if there's a better mate out there for her. And so I think that if you look at the weight of the evidence, in my mind, I used to believe that the dual mating strategy was the best hypothesis to explain why women have affairs. I no longer believe that. I think the mate switching accounts for much more, a much larger percentage of why women have affairs. Now, it's possible, of course, that both could have some merits to them. But I think at this point in the science, the dual mating strategy hypothesis is at a minimum no longer as credible as it was before given these failures to replicate.
And to quote your book, 79% of women said that they were falling in the surveys that you did of women who cheated. 79% of women reported that they fell in love with the person, their affair partner, and only 30% of men did. So that would lay credence to your belief that when women cheat, their intention is to end the relationship. When men cheat, that's not necessarily the case.
Right. Yeah. And they might not even be aware of their intention at the time. That is, they may just meet someone and find them attractive and have sex with them. But once they start the affair, you ask them, well, why did you do this? And then they reveal what you just described.
Can we talk about, because you mentioned this about mate insurance, the backup mating strategy is something I had no idea about until your most recent book.
Yeah, well, it's basically the same logic as what we've been talking about, that is something bad can always happen to your mateship. We know that in addition to the things we've talked about, injury, death to the regular mate, lowering in status, et cetera, your mate could dump you, and so if you have a backup, so a woman who is left without cultivating potential backup mates, she would be kind of stranded and have to start mating from square one. Whereas if she's cultivated a couple backup mates, then she can transition to those backup mates if something should happen to a regular mateship. And this is why these are studies I did with Josh Duntley, a former student of mine who's now a professor of criminology. And what we found, and this was kind of surprising to us, is that women especially got upset if their backup mate fell in love with another woman. Or became seriously involved with
Dr. Buss,
I
can tell you empirically, anecdotally, that this is 100% accurate. Yes. Yeah. I've absolutely been in situations before where I ended relationships with somebody and I believed it to be amicable. And when I started seeing someone who was as attractive or more attractive than them, the behavior was so irrational that I couldn't understand why. I was like, you're with someone else. Why are we fighting? I don't understand what's going on. And when I heard this backup mating strategy hypothesis, I was like, again, evolutionary psychology to the rescue. Once again, a thing I didn't understand that is very clearly explained here.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
But the example you give in the book is literally a woman who leaves her husband. They're both scientists. Leaves her husband, and then she goes off and she's with someone else. He's taking care of the kids, and then when he finds someone else, she comes home and breaks stuff at the house.
Right. Yeah, and which seems like totally rational because she was the one who had the affair. She was the one who wanted to end the relationship. And then, so why is she getting so upset when he gets involved with someone else? Well, the mate switching, the backup mate hypothesis explains that. He was initially willing to wait in the wings and wait till the affair burned itself out, and then he would be the backup and be content to get back together with her. And so, but once he gets remated, fell in love, and actually subsequently got married, that backup mate got terminated. So yeah, these things, I see examples of this all over the place.
And I'll bet you, if you asked her, she probably started feeling some stress and couldn't even explain why. I'll bet you it was something. It was, again, this is what we talk about. When something is pervasive amongst Homo sapiens, this is what I say. If anything is pervasive amongst Homo sapiens, it must fit somewhere in evolution. So in this situation, it's like there's this thing. You understand, Dr. Buss, it's very difficult for people to believe the idea that we are basically like meat robots that are programmed through natural selection, because that sort of tends to make you believe that free will isn't a real thing. And I give this example all the time, like find someone you don't think is attractive, make yourself do it. You can't do it? Oh, I thought you had free will. Go ahead and enjoy the taste of eating poop. Oh, you don't want to eat poop? Oh, it's interesting. You can't do that? Oh, I thought you had free will, but what, you don't have free will? I don't understand. So that's the thing. I think a lot of people find that scary. Can you go into that, how the pushback that you get from the social sciences because of some of the conclusions that you have, including the fact that even though, listen, I have no problem, I'm an ally to anyone who wants to change their assigned gender. There's no problem with that whatsoever. However, you cannot tell me that 50,000 years ago this was a common practice, because I don't believe so. And I also don't believe that men can have children. So that in this type of situation, can you talk about some of the pushback that you get, Dr. Gad Saad jokes about from women's studies groups when it comes to some of the findings that you have from evolutionary psychology?
Yeah, well, I think one is a generic pushback, and that is that people don't like to think that you can explain and predict their behavior.
Yeah.
And this isn't just unique to evolutionary psychology. So even B.F. Skinner had a very different theory of human nature, where humans were governed by contingencies of reinforcement. We do what we are rewarded for doing, and that all of our current characteristics are due to a history of reinforcement. Well, people didn't like that either, because that provided a causal or deterministic theory about who we were. So people don't like things that interfere with their perceived free will, theories that attempt to undermine their perceived free will to begin with. When it comes to evolution, though, I think there are additional things. Okay, one is that some people want humans to be sexually monomorphic. That is, they want men and women to be clones or identical to each other, except by virtue of the way their parents brought them up, or the way the culture treats them, or the way they're brainwashed by the media.
The blank slate.
The blank slate. And it's just a naive thing. I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, we know that men and women have fundamentally different reproductive biologies. Fertilization occurs internally within women, not within men. Women bear the cost of 9-month pregnancy. Men do not. Women breastfeed or lactate. Men do not. As we talked about earlier, the fertility curves by age differ dramatically between males and females. There are all these fundamental sex differences in our reproductive biology. And to think that we have these fundamental differences, yet no differences in our brains, our minds, or in our evolved psychology is just simply naive. It would be like arguing that, well, we have the anatomy for walking on two legs, for bipedal locomotion, but we don't ever walk on two legs.
Got it.
Wherever you see differences in anatomy, physiology, and biology, you see corresponding differences in psychology, and in this case, in mating strategies. And so people don't like that. Some people don't like that, as people who subscribe to, the sexual monomorphism view of males and females. And then there are also specific findings that people don't like. So, for example, some women don't like the high value that men place on physical appearance, because they would think, it's something that you have a limited ability to alter, although people, of course, do try to alter it. Cosmetic surgery and makeup, the fact that makeup and cosmetic surgery, that 90% plus of these industries are driven by women wanting to improve their appearance, is a reflection not of the fact they've been brainwashed by the media, but rather men have a strong preference for physical attractiveness in women, and hence women have to compete with each other in this domain. That is, the preferences of one sex set the ground rules for the competition in the opposite sex. And so that finding bothers some people. The finding that men prefer women who are younger than they are, that bothers some people, especially women who are older, for example. And we know, for example, just here's one statistic, that if you get married and get divorced, get remarried, get divorced, the average age gap increases. So the average age gap, the first marriage is 3 years. Husbands, on average, 3 years older than wives. Second marriage, if men get divorced or remarry, it's 5 years. Third marriage is 8 years. So men marry women who are progressively younger than they are. And so what that means is that women who are the same age as this guy, as he's getting older, have fewer and fewer potential mates in their mating pool. And so in essence, it's younger women who are stealing or poaching the potential mates of these older women. And so some people don't like that finding. And again, I mean, maybe in an ideal world that shouldn't exist. I even talked to one male evolutionary psychologist who said that as he got older and older, he expected his attraction to change. That is, he expected to become more and more attracted to older and older women, and was somewhat distressed by the fact that his standards of attractiveness did not change. And he pointed out
he would become attracted to older women, but instead he's still attracted to 24-year-olds.
Yeah. And there's sort of an illustration. He said, like, and this is perhaps less relevant, but there aren't like two different versions of Playboy magazine, one for younger guys and one for older guys, or a Maxim. The same women, young, attractive women are displayed in both cases. And if it were the case that standards of attractiveness changed dramatically as you got older, then there would be these niche markets, and they don't exist. So some people don't like that finding. Some people don't like the finding that, and this is both men and women, some men and women don't like the finding that women prioritize a guy's resources and the status and resources of a guy. And I remember giving a lecture once where there was this young 18-year-old guy, and he was really upset by this finding because I guess he didn't have a lot of resources.
Right.
Most undergraduates don't at the time. But it really bothered him. He said, "You mean I have to gain some status and resources to become attractive?" I said, "Well, you don't have to, but if you do, it will make you more attractive because women prefer those qualities." And some people say, "So you're saying women are gold diggers?" Well, I'm not saying women are gold diggers. And contrary to the Kanye West,
we got Kanye West in here, Travis. We got Kanye West and a dating story. We win.
Yeah. Well, it's that I don't know. Is that song called Gold Digger?
Yeah, it's called Gold Digger. Absolutely.
I'm not saying she is a gold digger, but actually, it's Here's one other anecdote on that. I remember hearing this woman told me about this story. She was talking to a female friend of hers who was dating this guy who was really short, and we know that women prefer men who are somewhat above average for men. And she said, "Why are you dating this guy? He's so short." And the woman said, "Well, he's pretty tall when he stands on his wallet." So that kind of illustrates the importance of that, and also the fact that for women, a guy's attractiveness is so dependent on circumstances and context.
Yes.
We mentioned one earlier where we talked about, are you the organizer of a conference or just a participant in the conference?
Yes.
That's one context. But women also evaluate other things. A guy who, if you took and maybe this is wrong, but if you took a still photo of Mick Jagger and just showed him to women who knew nothing about him, would they rate him as very attractive? I don't know, maybe not. But rock stars become attractive because of their status, because of their accomplishments, because of their resources. And so there are all these contexts that influence women's attraction to men and fewer contexts that influence men's attraction to women. That is, men tend to focus heavily on those physical cues. And some people find those findings upsetting.
Well, it's interesting because when you teamed up with Dr. Cindy Meston about why women have sex, which I highly recommend everyone check out that book. There are 238. I make this joke all the time. There's 238 reasons why women choose to have sex with men, and 4 reasons why men choose to have sex with women. Right? It's the standard deviation for what women find attractive. Most of my friends are female, Dr. Buss, and the standard deviation for what women find attractive is so varied. When you compare it to what men find attractive, it is unbelievably varied. One thing, a note you do make in your book, and I want to make this note right now. We are talking about statistical probabilities here. We're not saying all the time, right? That's why when this gentleman said, he tried to say, well, you're saying all women are gold diggers. That's not what Dr. David Buss is saying. He's saying that when we survey, I believe in Why Women Have Sex, you surveyed 17,000 women. I believe that's correct. Somewhere in that anonymously. Yeah, an enormous.
It's in the thousands. I don't remember the exact number.
Numerous thousands of women. And when you do that, you're going to come up with, like, for instance, we said before, if 79% of women say that they fall in love with their affair partner, that is a statistically significant number, right? That's outside of one standard deviation of what you would expect. And so because of that, that's why we would use this. Again, this is not, these are heuristics. This is not a function where every time we expect all women to prefer all tall men. That is not what we're saying here.
Absolutely. And we're talking about on average sex differences.
Correct.
And normally, and I say that at the beginning of the new book. That,
yes.
Just insert the phrase on average. Because there are a million exceptions, but still the on average, it means that there's overlap in the distributions, but there's a strong mean difference, average difference in effect. And
We call it in statistics negative kurtosis. So I try to plot this out for my guy friends. For what men find attractive is Jessica Biel at 21, and it's like this very narrow normal distribution. And for women, the distribution spreads out like this. And so the term is negative kurtosis. So that's the way I see it, because I know women specifically who are attracted to short, exceptionally loud, confident men, and I know some women who are. I have a female friend of mine. She's an adult actress, and she's only attracted because she films porn. She's only attracted to men that she dates that are physically unattractive. She does not want to compete with other women. It's one of the most mind-boggling things when she tried to explain this to me. Every single thing I can come up with, there's women that are attracted to that thing. And then in general, when we talk about that middle standard deviation plus minus 1 sigma, we're talking about taller, more wealth, symmetrical features, masculine androgenic features. Then in general, we see that to be the case as well. So I've seen all of those things. But for men, I tend to see symmetrical face, signs of youth, very pervasive amongst what men find attractive, anecdotally, compared to what women find attractive, which is a wide. Dr. Buss, you've seen these men covered their faces in tattoos, arms covered in tattoos, face tattoos, the Post Malone, and these are things that I cannot imagine why women find these things attractive, and yet they find them so incredibly attractive.
Yeah, which is good in a way, because what that means is that
we all have a shot. We've all got a shot. That's what it means.
Exactly. So I know, just anecdotally, one woman colleague who wants men who have deep knowledge of Russian literature, so that she can have interesting conversations and in-depth conversations. Now, this is an idiosyncratic preference. I mean, how many men have deep knowledge of Russian literature? But what it means is those guys who do, they have a mating advantage. So if all women were going after exactly the same guys, then a lot of us would be out of luck.
Yes, and if you are a fan of Tolstoy, go ahead and contact Dr. Buss, and then he can give you get the girl's number. So the other thing is, when you said we talked about things that were offensive, Dr. Buss, you and I were educated in the great state of Texas. There are a great number of individuals who don't even like that word evolution. They say things like, we came from monkeys, which, by the way, we did not come from monkeys. We came from Australopithecus. And so that in and of itself, some people find to be offensive. Have you found any pushback when it comes to that?
Yeah, I haven't really. I mean, I teach an undergraduate class in evolutionary psychology, and of course, evolution. I teach evolution in all the courses. And I have had interesting discussions. So like there are, students, I remember this one woman who was deeply religious, comes from a small town in Texas, and she was really smart and understood the logic of the evolutionary process. And she said it was really causing problems with her because it conflicted with her upbringing and the religious beliefs in her upbringing. But she, I don't know how she ended up resolving these potential conflicts, but I really haven't gotten any pushback, on it. I'm more likely to get pushback from mainstream social scientists than from anybody else. But now, of course, it's a select group, right? University of Texas is a pretty elite institution. I mean, you have to be
the most elite institution, Dr. Buss.
Yeah. I mean, you have to. Well, it's a fact. You have to get. More so when you went there than when I went there. It was easier to get into when I got in, but now you really have to be exceptional to get in as an undergraduate, and so you're dealing with a much smarter than average group who is seeking education and probably more open to scientific explanations, and so. So it's a different group. But I also find interesting, if you just talk to someone on the street, a car mechanic, a carpenter, a waitress, they find the logic of evolutionary psychology quite compelling and have fewer problems than people who are brainwashed by taking a lot of courses in social sciences.
So let's talk about that. You said you used the term earlier, media brainwashing. I find that to be sort of the straw man for pretty much everything, where the media I don't know if you've seen recently what Victoria's Secret is going to start having plus size models on, and they're also going to have transgender models on. And again, I'm not the slightest bit offensive. They're a private company. They can do whatever they want, and I'll probably watch and see what happens. But the idea was from that was the sexualization. Like, for instance, I'm supposed to find Giselle Munchin, who's Tom Brady's wife, the Victoria's Secret model. I find her attractive because I was socialized to do so. Media brainwashed me to find her signs of youth and her physical symmetry. I was brainwashed into believing that, and therefore we're going to change those images, and therefore we're going to change your brainwashing or your programming. Have you seen this before, sir?
Yeah. I've seen it. And in fact, that was the dominant explanation for in social sciences, is that standards of beauty are entirely arbitrary, entirely culturally variable, and in the modern environment, highly influenced by media images. Now, I should say that there is some flexibility in the system. So, for example, in my lifetime, there's been a shift in like the booty size preference. So, like of Kim Kardashian, for example, you go back 20, 30 years, and Kim Kardashian's booty size is probably not viewed as the most attractive. So there is some flexibility in the system on those dimensions. Okay, but I'll note she has a very attractive waist to hip ratio, and so it's not size per se, but it's also ratios. And I don't know if
Dr. Buss, I don't know if you know what TikTok is, but you're about to go viral on TikTok. That was the most incredible thing I've ever heard. I have the world's foremost evolutionary psychologist talking about Kim Kardashian's booty. That is the most incredible. I could not possibly have asked for anything more from this interview. I'm about to start crying. I'm so happy. Yes, Dr. Buss, that is exactly right. The preferences have changed. Also through plastic surgery, the preferences have changed. Dr. Buss, I had, unfortunately, she was double booked. We were going to have I was going to have a co-host. She is a clinical psychologist, or she is a marriage and family therapist. She has a master's in psychology, and she is an FHM cover model. She's absolutely stunning. And she's, I'm not going to say how old she is, but you will not be able, when you see her, you will not be able to tell how old she is because of, modern medicine, plastic surgery, and whatnot. She looks like she's in her early 20s, and she's not. She has a thriving practice. That's why she's actually not here right now. And I wanted to have her on here because one of the things that I've noticed, Dr. Buss, especially here in Las Vegas and Los Angeles, I meet so many women who are in their early 40s who look like they're in their 20s because of liposuction, skin tightening, breast implants, which, by the way, great state of Texas, 1974, the Texas Medical Center is where they started doing breast implants in the United States. That whole thing started. Oh, Dr. Buss, we could get into strip clubs too. That also started pretty close to where you are right now. That whole thing has changed that curve. We were talking about the fertility curve, right? Now we have women, for instance, Satoshi Kanazawa talks about this in Why Beautiful People Have More Daughters, the inability to maintain blonde hair for later in life. So women they dye their hair platinum blonde as a sign of youth. They have fake hair, so we can't tell how old they are. They have a hip to waist ratio that is manufactured through liposuction and, you know what BBLs are, sir, Brazilian butt lifts. They take the fat out of their waist and they're putting it in women's butts. That's probably,
I've never heard that term.
Yeah, look up Brazilian butt lift. That is actually how you can manufacture that 0.72 to 0.68 hip to waist ratio that you referred to in the book. And then breast implants, which they show the breast to be higher and closer together, which are signs of youth. Have you done any studies on anything like this, as how women are able to maintain a physical appearance later on in life?
Yeah, well, I haven't done direct studies on that, but there are there are two things worth mentioning. One is the one that you just mentioned. That is, we have modern cosmetic procedures and also even more sophisticated makeup without cosmetic procedures that can alter appearance. And of course, no one alters their appearance to make them look uglier, older, or in ill health. All the appearance modifications are in the direction of cues to youth, cues to health, cues to fertility. But the other thing is that in ancestral times, women and men, they lived outdoors. They were in the sun all the time. And so if you take a woman who's, let's say, 20, who lived under traditional hunter-gatherer conditions, she looks like what in our culture would look like a 40-year-old. And so, avoiding the sun and not living under the ecological conditions that our ancestors did, people are able to preserve their youthful appearance.
And you mean by that for things like sun damage, no makeup, like stuff like that? That's what you're saying? Yeah, got it. Okay, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah, and combined with the fact that in earlier times of human evolutionary history, women gave birth earlier in life and more frequently than they do now, and that also alters physical appearance, increases waist-hip ratio, alters pigmentation, alters even hair color.
That's incredible. Okay, yeah, I mean that is really interesting. I have a lot of friends that I talk to about this, and they have an issue with the idea that that almost all of our preferences would come from evolution. And the way I try to explain them to Dr. Buss is like, just say hominids. Let's just go all the way back to Australopithecus. So 3 million years, we have Homo habilis, and then eventually about 300,000 years ago, we have Homo sapiens. And then, so now here's 300,000 years of Homo sapien evolution, right? And now here we have 11,000 years since the agricultural revolution, and we have about 15 years of Facebook. And what's happened is the 15 years of Facebook, because it is so modern, it tends to weigh on the mind more than the idea of understanding that there used to be fewer than 100,000 Homo sapiens on the planet just trying to survive. And anything they did that was extra, that did not help them survive, those people died. And reproduce did not help them out. Yeah. And that also brings me to another point. I hear this term all the time because I'm constantly, you said it before, the father of evolutionary psychology is actually Charles Darwin. And so Charles Darwin did not include the term survival of the fittest in his original, I believe is 1859 when he wrote on the origin of species. Later on that came around, and even that term, survival of the fittest, is a misnomer. It is survival of the fit enough to replicate.
Right. Yeah. Stated differently, differential reproductive success is the engine of the evolutionary process, not differential survival success.
Yes.
I mean, you can survive to be 150, but if you fail in the game of mating, then you're going to be an evolutionary dead end.
And that's another thing. Like, you and I are the outcome of 40,000 generations, maybe more than that, of successful reproductive attempts. Right? That is the one thing that all of our ancestors have in common. So anything that we would feel as far as like our proclivity for sugars, salts, or fats, or our proclivity to a hip to waist ratio, our proclivity to blue eyes, our proclivity to blonde hair, or action movies, or dominant male characters, or whatever it is pervasive, it must exist somewhere in evolution if it is pervasive amongst, like you said before, 37 different cultures.
Yeah. No, I think I really like the way that you put that, because what it is that selection acts like a sieve. So in every generation, only a subset makes it through. Only a subset survives and then successfully mates and reproduces. And so you go through, say, 40,000 generations of this selective sieving. Every single generation, we are the successful descendants of this incredibly long chain of successful ancestors, each of whom survived, each of whom succeeded in attracting a mate, selecting a fertile mate, reproducing, and having a kid, raising that kid to reproductive age so that they could then reproduce. I mean, and these are not easy tasks to do. And so that's one. It's a positive thing. We are all evolutionary success stories, is another way to put it.
So that would go back to another point that I have, is that the idea that how difficult it was. So I think one thing a lot of people, again, also don't understand because of the agricultural revolution or modern times, is I could just go to McDonald's and get all the sugar, salt, and fat I could ever possibly want, to the point, like, right. I don't know if you've ever read any of Jared Diamond's books, or Jared Diamond's books from UCLA, where the anthropologist, where he talks about Inuit civilizations. Once they're introduced to McDonald's, they go through horrible diabetes. Like they gorge themselves, because they still live in an ancestral environment, and now they're coming back to where they can consume as much protein as they could possibly ever want. And so now, going back to it, the majority of, and you don't really discuss much about the ancestral environment in your books, but Steven Pinker does to some extent when we talk about the idea of how difficult it was for Homo sapiens. Because one of the things that I think a lot of people, because I get this question all the time about human evolution, and my answer is human evolution is over. There are 400,000 elephants on the planet and 8 billion Homo sapiens. We won. All the large land animals on the planet, they are cultivated by Homo sapiens. We won. And the thing is, are people getting smarter or dumber? They're getting smarter and dumber, because there's just more of us. There's estimates 22 billion Homo sapiens will be on the planet in like 20, 30 years. So the idea is, Okay, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, let's go back 100,000 years ago. There are certain evolutionary pressures in order for you to conform to certain things in order for you to reproduce and for your species to survive. And those evolutionary pressures in 2021 are completely gone now. So there's no evolutionary pressure. We're the apex species on the planet now.
Yeah, we certainly are the apex species. I would not say that evolution has stopped. I would say that it's changed. So first of all, how it's changed, we don't know exactly, but you still have to survive, and you still have to reproduce. You still have to find a fertile mate. Now, I guess if you could maybe go and with IVF and buy eggs that aren't yours, or get you can reproduce in ways other than selecting a fertile mate. But these are still statistically pretty rare. But you still have to survive and you still have to reproduce. What does change is selection pressures. So as you alluded to, over evolutionary time, even things like finding enough food to eat, and even finding enough meat to consume. So in traditional hunter-gatherer cultures, they have words for being not just hungry, but meat hungry. And so they spent a lot of their time just foraging for food, hunting for animals, making it through long winters and ice ages where there wasn't much food around. And that is one reason why things like being a good hunter is a key status criterion in hunter-gatherer cultures. And we have modern analogs of good hunters in the current environment.
They just have a Lamborghini instead of a deer.
They have a Lamborghini and a lot of Bitcoin.
Exactly. We got a Bitcoin. Dude, this is the greatest. We hit the triad. We had the booty, the Bitcoin, and the dating. I'm so happy right now. Yeah, that's incredible. Dr. Buss, can we talk a little bit about jealousy, right? So jealousy as an adaptive strategy. This is also another thing that catches a lot of people off guard. The idea that jealousy is not just some sort of immaturity or something that happens from PTSD. That jealousy is actually an adaptive mating strategy that comes to us through evolution.
Basically, it comes up mainly in the context of long-term mating. And if you're going to invest heavily in a long-term mate, you want to be able to retain that mate and fend off mate poachers and prevent infidelity. So, and for men, preventing infidelity is also preventing genetic cuckoldry, or increasing the odds that you are in fact the father of the child. And so this is why solving this paternity uncertainty problem is one reason why so very, very few mammals actually have anything resembling a pair bonded mating strategy like humans do. Because you have to solve the paternity confidence problem if you're going to be investing 10, 20 years of your time, attention, energy, and resources in an offspring. You don't want to be investing in an offspring that's not your own. So male and female sexual jealousy is an adaptation that is designed to guard the primary mate, prevent mate poachers from mating with that mate, prevent mate poachers from luring that mate away from you for a long-term mateship. So basically it's evolved to prevent threats to this very valued mateship. And it would be like if you have an expensive car or an expensive house and you have no mechanisms to prevent other people from taking it or destroying it. And that's why people have alarm systems on their cars and on their houses, because other people, want the desirable things they have, and we want to prevent them from stealing them from us. And so jealousy is really that protective mechanism that is designed to fend off mate poachers and prevent these infidelities and defections. So I wrote a whole book on this called Dangerous Passion, on jealousy and infidelity specifically, where it was, the explanations were in the social sciences. Yeah, this is a sign of immaturity, neurosis. People suspect their partners of infidelity because they're delusional. It's a sign of pathology. But in fact, it's a very functional mechanism. And without it, if you consider ancestrally, two men, one who was not jealous at all and said was perfectly comfortable with other men having sex with their partner,
right,
and a man who was jealous and fended off that potential mate poacher, who's going to be more reproductively successful?
Natural selection will select for the guy who guards his own genes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. Wow. Okay. Well, that's, again, you understand that would, some people would find that offensive. The idea that jealousy, this thing that's caused so much strife and chaos in other people's lives, is actually something that's selected for evolutionarily. But you make sense. I mean, that definitely seems to be an issue. Can we talk about something, the long-term versus short-term? So you make a big distinction in your book about the strategies for long-term mating and short-term mating. And then when it comes to short-term mating with men, the Dark Triad. Can you go into long-term versus short-term?
Yeah. So in my view, humans have a menu of mating strategies. That is, we have long-term committed mating, attachment. We also have short-term mating, casual sex, hookups. We have serial mating, so mating for a while, breaking up, mating for a while, breaking up. We have mixed mating strategies, mating with one person, having an affair with another person, or some sex on the side. So we have a very complex menu of mating strategies. The distinction between short-term and long-term is critical because the qualities that we want in a short-term mate and differ from those that we want in a long-term mate. We kind of alluded to this earlier when we talked about good dad qualities. So women in a long-term mate, they want good dad qualities. Men in a long-term mate, they want partners who are going to be faithful to them, who are going to be sexually loyal, who are not going to cheat on them. Whereas in short term, it doesn't matter. So, if a person's had multiple sex partners or will have multiple sex partners, it's not really that relevant in short-term mate selection. And so we have a different psychology around what qualities we desire in long-term and short-term mating. We have differences in what strategies we adopt to attract short-term partners versus long-term partners. And then things like jealousy come into play in the context of long-term partners and almost never come into play in the context of short-term partners.
And you mentioned before, like men will lower their standards when it comes to looking for short-term partner. This is the beer goggles. Can you give the evolutionary psychology laboratory scientific PhD explanation of beer goggles?
Yeah, well, there's beer goggles and there's non-beer goggles. So the classic studies were what are called the closing time effect.
Yes.
And so you go into a bar or club and say, ask people how attractive are members of the opposite sex at 9 o'clock, at 10:30, at midnight, at closing time. And for men, girls get prettier near closing time. That's the effect. And now people thought, well, maybe it is just beer goggles, and that's part of it. So, but it turns out if you statistically control for alcohol consumption, you still get girls get prettier near closing time.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, and so the way I interpret that is that as the window of opportunity for short-term mating starts to close near closing time, people lower their standards. Men especially lower their standards and find other women attractive.
To embarrassing levels is what you said previously.
Yeah, to embarrassing levels, because they wake up the next morning and go, "What was I thinking?" And that's I guess a context-specific shift in male standards of attractiveness, depending on that window of opportunity for successfully short-term mating.
And then for females in short-term mating, you also mentioned they're looking for more masculine features and symmetrical features.
Yeah, they tend to look for more masculine features. That's one of them, especially masculine bodies. So a high shoulder to hip ratio, guys who are physically fit, not necessarily like the muscle-bound guys like you might see in like Arnold Schwarzenegger's earlier.
That's an overperception that men have, that women are attracted to that level of physical muscularity.
Right. And it's an erroneous perception.
Yes,
because women like men who are physically fit, but not muscle-bound.
Yeah, because
also that could be a sign of narcissism.
Or in the ancestral environment, a hindrance to carry 270 pounds of muscle when you're trying to do certain, or flexibility, like different things like that. To be a hunter, you don't need to weigh 270 pounds. So I could definitely see that being an issue. And then going to the Dark Triad. So you also mentioned before about the idea of the idea of people who use sort of manipulative ideas in order for short-term mating. I'm telling you, a lot of women very interested in this idea.
Yeah. So, well, yeah. So, guys who we've looked at tactics that are effective in short-term mating. And one of the most ineffective tactics for guys is to go up to a woman and say, hi, I find you attractive, let's have sex. Although for women, that's a very effective tactic. If a woman's looking for a short-term, that's probably the most effective.
You and I would
tactic.
have no idea about that, but yes, I'm sure that would be very effective.
Yeah. And so what guys do is they give off signals of a long-term interest. Hey, look how similar we are. We share all these interests, our values, our politics, our worldviews, our religious orientations. And so, boy, I find you so fascinating. We really should have a deeper conversation about these issues.
Dr. Buss, you're giving up the game. Dr. Buss, you're telling you're snitching on all of us, Dr. Buss. Keep going.
Yeah. So men use long-term tactics, signal long-term interest for short-term gain, short-term sex, and they do it sometimes deceptively, and women over time learn to detect when it is deceptive and when it's not. But for younger women and who are less experienced on the mating market, these tactics sometimes work.
Are these things evolutionary also? Because I imagine men lying about long-term fecundity is something that's been going on for thousands of years, and women being able to detect these lies is something that...
Yeah. That's one of the things that I would call a zone of conflict between the sexes, where what's optimal from a male point of view differs than what's optimal from a female point of view. And, one way to phrase this, I notice you have a book by Richard Dawkins behind
I do.
you.
That's just for you, sir.
But a quote, I'd much rather have a book by my book in front of his book.
Okay, I'm going to... I will do it.
But so sort of status competition here.
Yeah.
But one of the great phrases that Richard Dawkins has in not one of his books, but in his scientific publications before that, is any animal that perceives can be deceived.
Yes.
And so whenever you have any feature of our perceptual mechanism or psychological adaptation, it can be fooled. And in fact, we're fooled all the time. I mean, media images are an example of tricking our psychology into certain things. So that's why you see, you mentioned models, the Playboy bunnies and other attractive women that you I don't know if you use these for the mate copying advantage.
Absolutely, I do, 100%. I am not the slightest bit embarrassed about it either.
Okay, but you take the you take attractive women, you take 5,000 photos of them, and then you take the most attractive photos of those and you Photoshop them, and those are the media images we see. And so are those representative of what these women actually look like? Well, not so much. Again, I'm not going to relate a too personal a dating story, but back when I was single, there was a woman that I knew who worked for a modeling agency, and she wanted to introduce me to models. And I was kind of struck by the fact that we see a lot of these models without their makeup. They look just kind of average, many of them. They don't look stunning, but then you see the end result of Photoshopped images of them, and they look absolutely stunning. And so this is there's a way in which our perceptual mechanisms do get tricked or parasitized by modern information, modern technology.
Dr. Buss, I'm going to tell you that it's just recently in the last couple of years gotten 10 times worse, because as you're familiar with the experiment where they take as a intro to psychology class, and they take all the photos, the class photos for all the different people in the class, they lay them all over each other, and they come up with an average looking face, which looks more attractive than the faces. Yeah. Right. You're aware of that. Yeah. So there's a company in Russia that figured that out, and they created an algorithm in order to change anyone's face to the most symmetrical version of their face that they can. And that app is called FaceApp. And there's probably a lot of people listening to this for right now who use FaceApp. FaceApp, I can do what you did on Photoshop in 30 minutes. I can do it in 4 seconds, all of it. And Dr. Buss, it is shocking. If you ever have a chance, we will go back and forth. I'll send you some photos of some before and afters, and I'll show you some edits that I do in 4 seconds, and it is mind-blowing. And it has now become pervasive where, again, if standards of beauty are not arbitrary and they deal with things like symmetrical faces, right, and big eyes and things like that, then that means there's a formula I can write to take anyone's face and make small incremental changes to them, to the size of the nose and the spacing of the eyes and things like that. And I should be able to achieve a standard of beauty. And this app has absolutely done it. And we've done podcasts specifically on this topic where women are making themselves look absolutely flawless. It gets even crazier, Dr. Buss. Now these women are using FaceApp on their face, taking the photo and walking into a plastic surgeon's office and saying, I want my face to look like this. That is the level. That is the level that we've gotten to now. And Dr. Buss, when you, I know I just checked it out, by the way, PROF, David Buss is his Instagram. Dr. Buss, you're about to enter in a whole new world here on Instagram. Everybody follow Dr. Buss. When you see on there, you're going to see there's actually, this is one of the most mind-blowing things. Check out Coconut Kitty 143. This woman is, I believe, in her 40s, and she has a body where it's very, a lot of plastic surgery. She had breast implants, all this kind of stuff. And she uses a filter on her face that makes her look 14. And she looks 14, Dr. Buss, and you can't even tell that it's edited. So she has a 14-year-old's face, and she has this body like a porn star, and this woman has millions and millions. She makes millions of dollars a year online on OnlyFans. And we'll get into OnlyFans at some point. I'd love to talk to you about that if you ever get a chance. But the whole thing about editing faces, where the term Photoshop, actually, that's a proprietary app by Adobe. It's almost like we say the word Coca-Cola when we mean all soft drinks. We say the word Photoshop when we mean Adobe Photoshop, but we mean any kind of video editing software.
Yeah.
We've gotten to the point now, it is, Dr. Buss, one click, I'll make you look exactly like you did when you were 23. It is shocking the ability for us to do this now. And all it does is it goes back to the signs of youth and facial symmetry. And just like that, you look like it. And it's become very scary to where I meet people in person in some of these events that I host, and I can't recognize them. I'm interviewing an individual, and I've been told that this person's a playmate, and then afterwards they show me their Instagram, and I'm like, this is who I was interviewing? I had no idea. I've been corresponding with this person for the catfishing. I've been corresponding with this person for weeks, and I had no idea that that's who it was. So, Dr. Buss, we have gone into a brave new world, and almost like Moore's Law, where the computational power doubles every 18 months. That's where we're getting now. It's happening so fast that it's like now video, literally deep fake videos of individuals talking and speaking that aren't even real. Like the ability to edit video and photos is just, it's mind-boggling. Things that you would expect to hire a guy for 10 grand to do, you can do by yourself for $5. That part is absolutely incredible. I'm gonna go off in a different direction. These are questions I don't think anyone's ever asked you before. I've listened to probably a dozen of your podcasts before. I love Why Women Have Sex by you and Cindy Meston, and I love. But one of the things I love about it is that the fact that you guys were in the same psychology department. And I've always in my mind imagined you going to her office or her coming to yours and you guys having a beer or, going to Stubbs barbecue or something like that. Where did this come from for you guys to have the audacity to make a book called Why Women Have Sex? The idea for it, where did it come from? What was your relationship like with Dr. Meston, and what was the ethos for this?
Yeah, well, so no one has asked me that before. A short story is, we've been friends for a long time, and we would go out to dinner or go out for a drink periodically. And one time we were out, and she actually raised this issue. I have to give her credit. She said, I wonder if anyone's ever looked at why people have sex, and we're interested in why humans have sex. And so just over the course of these drinks and dinner, it was interesting because I would say, well, let's see. Here's one reason. When people have sex because of X. And then she would come up with 7 reasons. And then I would come up with one more, and she would come up with another 7. And finally, at the end of the conversation, we said, well, we got to do a study about it. And so we used a methodology that I had developed called a act nomination procedure, where we just simply asked hundreds and hundreds of people, why do you have sex? Why do your friends have sex? And we came up with what boiled down to 237 different reasons, but it really stemmed from this dinner conversation that I had, and then what happened was we published the article, in a scientific journal. The article got picked up by a New York Times writer who wrote an article on it that became the most popular and most emailed article in the New York Times that year. I think that might have been 2009 or so. And so then I got contacted by my book agent and said, look, this thing has become viral. You guys should really write a book about it. And so we decided, what the hell, we'll write a book about it. And we called it, here's one other possible amusing anecdote about this, is some people say, well, why didn't you write a book about why men have sex? Well, we do. In our book, Why Women Have Sex, we also talk about why men have sex and talk about the sex differences. But someone once said, well, if you write a book about why men have sex, it wouldn't add up to a pamphlet, much less a whole book.
That's exactly my point. Yeah, it's not too difficult for us to discern. So yeah, that's amazing. For those of you who are wondering, and I highly recommend this book, chapter 1 is, again, a lot of women are like, yeah, I have sex because I'm attracted to a man. Well, that's chapter 1. Chapter 8 has to deal with sex trafficking and people actually being put into situations where they have to have sex. So this deals with everything. I had several of my friends read the book, and it was really interesting because I asked these different women in a survey why they had sex, and the look on each one's face. The first one saying, I have sex with my husband because he deserves for me to have sex with him because he took out the trash and he was a good husband. And the next woman is like, I had sex with my husband because I had 13 orgasms. And they looked at each other like, what? Like they were confused. Like, that's your reality? Because that's not my my reality. And the realities of the different things that happen. Like, I have... The majority of my friends are females, and I ask them these questions, and the difference, the deviation of why they actually have sex is so magnificent. And as men, we try to project our singular focus for why we have sex onto women, and then we get it wrong. So that's why we go off and take the steroids and try to get big and then have the Lamborghini and the fake watch, because we see signs of physical attractiveness in women, and then we project that onto women towards us, and then we make that mistake instead of understanding things like, kindness and agreeability and other things that you've mentioned before. Yeah.
No, that's exactly on point. Where first of all, women's sexual psychology is much more complicated than men's.
It has to be. They have because they take more risk.
They take more risk, and they have a larger number of adaptive problems they have to solve. But the other is that your point about using our own sexual psychology to infer the sexual psychology of others. And there's a way in which we're stuck in our own minds, in our own brains, in our own sexual psychology. And we have to make inferences about the sexual psychology of others. And that's a problem because men can't get into the sexual minds of women because they're men. And that's why you have things like, things you mentioned, but also dick pics. So, women will often receive unsolicited dick pic from guys thinking, I find images of women's genitals to be very attractive, so she's going to find an image of my dick to be attractive. And most women don't. That is, if they're unsolicited or unwanted, most women find these images to be gross because women tend not to like decontextualize images of male genitals, whereas men hone in on those physical attributes of women and do find them attractive.
Kim Kardashian's booty and dick pics. We are winning. This is incredible, Dr. Buss. Yes, that's exactly right. I was going to get into that. That's awesome. Yes.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is, so what we have to do is, in a way, this is where evolutionary psychology and the science surrounding evolutionary psychology can help us get out of our own brains and to understand the sexual psychology of those who are not like us.
That's incredible. Yes, that goes back to the muscularity thing that we talked about before, the overperception. Because I look at a woman because of her physical appearance, I would assume that she would look at the same as me. So I need more muscles and get bigger. And then you come to Las Vegas and you see these meatheads that walk around here during the daytime. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I want to talk to you about, sir, is your friendship with Dr. Gad Saad, who I'm also a huge fan of. From Concordia University, is also an evolutionary psychologist. Can you talk about your work with him, specifically his most recent book, The Consuming Instinct, which you wrote the forward book for? Can you talk about how you guys got together, and then how he actually quotes you several times in his new book, how his view of consumer evolutionary psychology and yours as far as mating are concerned, and how they work together?
Yeah, well, I should say I have a lot of respect for Gad. We haven't actually collaborated on any research like I have with Dr. Meston, but we're I would say members of the same intellectual tribe, if you will. And what I like about his work is he's like the consuming instinct. He's taken principles of evolutionary psychology and applied them in a very practical way to the domain of marketing. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. Using evolutionary psychology to apply to business, to marketing, to organizations, to the law, to politics, to all these different spheres of human life. Because as we talked about earlier, that's all we have is our evolved psychology. There is no other psychology. And so Gad has been really at the forefront of applying evolutionary psychology to the domain of marketing and human consumption. So, but we never collaborated. We've had drinks together. I think coffee. We were at the same conference once, not too long ago, and we've corresponded. I've been on his podcast a couple of times, and so we have I think a mutual respect for each other.
Well, that leads me to my next question, Dr. Buss. You have a new neighbor there in Austin, Texas. And he is the #1 podcaster in the world. And the question that I have is, how has Gad Saad been on Joe Rogan's program 12 times and they haven't had you on there yet? Because to be honest with you, sir, we're all fans of yours. I'd say myself and Dr. Gad Saad, we're your biggest fans. So have you reached out to Joe Rogan? Has there been any attempt to go on there?
Well, I hope that I do go on Joe Rogan at some point. I think my publisher was supposed to contact him to get on, and hopefully it will happen. But yeah, we have in Austin, as you probably know, we have a bunch of people. There's Joe Rogan, who's probably the most famous, but there's also Lex Fridman and Tim Ferriss has moved to Austin. So a bunch of really high profile podcasters are here in Austin. And I mean, Austin's a great place.
Well, let's get you on all of them. Definitely. I like call Gad and tell him to get you on Joe Rogan, because I've been waiting for years for Joe Rogan to have you on, because I think obviously I'm the biggest fan of your work, and I think
that would, and I like his podcast. I think it would be a lot of fun. I think it would be a really cool discussion.
Okay, so going even further down there, let's talk about another book. You actually wrote a book called The Murderer Next Door. And in that book, you come up with, at the very end of the book, one of the most fascinating questions that you have is like, people would ask the question, why murder happens so much? And your question was, why doesn't it happen more? And I thought that was very interesting, and that how many murders were actually happen because of men killing other men over women. Yeah. Well,
that's the thing is you can run from mating, but you can't hide from mating. Mating is everywhere. And in terms of motives for murder, mating is front and center. And so there's spousal murder. Most murders are male on male murders. A lot of it happens over things like status and resources. That is, the qualities men are competing with each other for status, for resources, because these are qualities that women desire, and they're willing to kill over it. And so, for example, one of the causes of murder is being humiliated by someone in public, so that you're in front of other people, where your reputation is tarnished. And these are what police call trivial altercations, but they're not trivial from the perspective of male psychology, because we live in a world where reputation is everything. And a man who lost his reputation, whose status slid into oblivion, he would basically be an evolutionary dead end.
Right.
And so we have adaptations to maintain our status. And one of them is to fight and sometimes kill to maintain our status.
Dr. Buss, where does something like psychopathy fit on the evolutionary scale? I've heard different theories about this, and you do mention psychopathy in the Dark Triad. Dark Triad being narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. But like when I say psychopathy, I'm specifically mean antisocial personality disorder, or any cluster B personality disorder like narcissistic personality disorder or borderline. Where do these things fit from an evolutionary standpoint? This is a theory that I've heard. There had to be someone in the tribe who'd be willing to sneak into the other tribe while they were asleep and bash people over the head with rocks and not have nightmares about it. And I'm curious, where do you think psychopathy fits in evolution?
Yeah, well, I think that one clue to that is, and this is, it gets into somewhat speculative territory, but I think reasonable speculation is that there's a huge sex difference in psychopathy. So males are wildly overrepresented. Among psychopaths, 3 to 4 times as many males as females. And psychopathy, one of the hallmarks is a severing of the empathy circuit. So as most people feel some sense of compassion when a child or a puppy gets injured, psychopaths don't. They might laugh. And so they're lacking this empathy circuit. And I think that lacking the empathy circuit actually is a design feature that helps males to do certain nasty things that males are good at, such as killing. And even things like rape, sexual coercion. These are people high on the Dark Triad, of which psychopathy is one element, are much more likely to be serial rapists, serial sexual harassers, and are willing to basically ignore the feelings and psychological states of the victims and not care about them. I think that it's also possible that the rates of psychopathy have increased evolutionarily, in more modern times. That is, once you get large urban areas, you are able to escape what would have been reputational damage. And I think your point about bashing the skulls of members of the outgroup might be important, because you have to, males who inflicted these costs on in-group members, they would have been ostracized.
Yeah.
The biologist or evolutionary anthropologist Richard Wrangham at Harvard thinks that these guys would have been killed. So if someone's harming members of your in-group, you kill them and get rid of them, or at least ostracize them. But if they're harming members of the out-group, members of your enemy, members of a different tribe, then that can be beneficial. And so I think it's rare that psychopaths become the leaders, the true leaders of the tribe. But every group seems to have psychopaths, and they serve some functions.
I don't know if you've ever read Dr. Martha Stout's book, The Sociopath Next Door, and then Conquering the Sociopath Next Door. She wrote it in 2005 and then again in 2020. Yeah. In those books, she actually does refer to, I believe it's in that book, or maybe Confessions of a Sociopath, about U.S. military leaders looking for people who have those sort of traits to be snipers, where they actually don't feel anything. And she also discusses specifically almost like a failure or an underdevelopment of the autonomic nervous system. So whereas you and I, if we had a dead body in the trunk, we'd be sweating if the police pulled us over, but whereas a sociopath would feel nothing. He'd just be like, "Oh, what's going on, Doc? You having a good time? You want to smoke?" They would. Right. And so the malformation of the autonomic nervous system causes them throughout their entire life to not feel empathy, or to not think of anybody suffering as a big deal, or not even be aware of suffering in any sense whatsoever. So that's really interesting, because again, this thing of psychopathy, we can see it all the way back in the Bible. We can see it, all the way through the anthropological record. It existed. So if it's that pervasive, it has to fit somewhere in evolution. And I've always wondered where something like that would fit in evolution, or narcissism for that matter. Where would narcissism fit in evolution? Do you have any theories as far as that's concerned?
Well, all these traits they're not categorical traits. They're continuously distributed. And so when we talk about psychopaths or narcissists, we're talking about kind of those at the tail of the distribution. And narcissism, I think, does have some advantages. That is, people who have the confidence to think that they are attractive and great and more intelligent than other people, et cetera, they're more likely to take risks. They're more likely to put themselves at the center of attention. And women are especially attracted to those qualities. As I mentioned before, the attention structure is so critical in determining someone's status. And narcissists put themselves at the center of attention, and so basically exploit the attention structure, and that makes them more attractive to women. So what we found in our research is that narcissists, those high on narcissism, are also more likely to commit the sexual overperception bias. That is, they're more likely to think that women are sexually interested in them when they're not, as they think they're hot, but they're not. But
and they might even send dick pics if they do that.
They might, but the belief that they're hot gives them the confidence to approach women.
Exactly. Yeah.
And a lot of men have, and I'm sure you're well aware of this, not because you were an exemplar, but because you're probably a counter-exemplar. But a lot of men have what I call dating anxiety or mating anxiety, where the fear of being rebuffed or shot down prevents them from even trying to approach a woman, especially with attractive women.
So I've heard an evolutionary explanation for that, and that is like right now I have, because of social media, access to the entire human population, or the human population that has a smartphone. Now, but what happened is in the ancestral period, my tribe might be 100. I'm using more, what's Dunbar's number? Maybe 150 people in my tribe, right? And so now of those 150 people, there's only a certain amount that I could possibly ever breed with. The women around my age or a little bit younger. And if I go and embarrass myself in front of that group of women, then I am unapologetically weeded out of existence. My genetics are. So I've got one shot near adolescence to bring home the meat, literally. And if I don't do that, then I am ostracized and I no longer get to mate. And then you have the elder tribes and the good hunters with multiple wives, and I'm one of the beta males that doesn't have any wife. And so that point where I am that inflection point where I have a chance to mate or a chance not to mate, there's so much riding on that now so all of a sudden I have this incredible amount of anxiety. Now I transmit that. Now we're in the modern times, and now even though there's contraceptives, and I'm going to meet a woman we're probably not going to have kids. We're just going on a date, and I met her on Tinder. I'm still nervous. Because of that, that evolutionary pressure to get this right this one time, because my tribe is only 150 people. It's not the 6 million people in Dallas where I grew up, or the 2 million people that live here in Vegas. It's not that. It's this small group of people that I have a chance to mate with. And I think that's maybe where some of this this dating rejection fear, because it's not rational, Dr. Buss. Really, like you get rejected by a woman, you're not going to die, right?
Right. From a purely rational perspective, in the modern environment, it's not rational. But as you said, ancestrally, it might have been. You almost quoted Eminem. You got one shot, one opportunity.
Dude, we got Eminem, Dr. Buss. We got to hang out. I'm telling you, got to come hang out with me in Vegas. I'm gonna introduce you to Eminem. How about that? So here we go. So I want to switch topics again, because this is something a lot of my audience is fascinated by. And Dr. Buss, I'm just going to be really honest with you. I pretty much exclusively date bisexual women, because I do not ever want to lie. I don't want to have those dark triad things, and yet at the same time, I understand my biology. I look at other women, so I like to date women who like women. I date women who date women. Dr. Buss, you did an interview with Dr. Andrew Huberman. Was that his name? I forgot.
Yes.
Yeah. And he just talked about monogamish relationships. Have you done any studies when it comes to a heterosexual man and bisexual women, or vice versa? Anything to do with that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have not yet, but that is on my agenda to do. One reason, and you can tell me whether this is correct or not, one possible advantage is that women who are into other women gives you access to other women.
Yes. Well, but the thing for me specifically is I never, ever have to lie, Dr. Buss, ever. I can be completely honest. Just imagine a heterosexual couple going to a party and she's like, did you sleep with that girl? And in most cases, the guy's like, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. In my case, I'm like, yes. And then she's like, how was she? Like there's no issues whatsoever. Yeah. And the other thing is I live in Las Vegas because there is just such a large number of bisexual women that live here, because the women here are so attractive. A lot of women move here for that reason. And so that's the reason why. So it's just one of these situations where I understand what my biology, my personal evolutionary psychology, where it guides me. And then because of that, I was like, what is the best way for me to do this where I don't harm anybody? What is the best way for me to do this where I can be as honest as I possibly can? And I don't know personally whether or not I found a solution, or if it's a situation where I'm just lying to myself. I don't really know. And I'm very fascinated to see if there's any studies specifically on something like this. Yeah. And the opposite. Yeah. I know some women who specifically date bisexual men who don't get jealous because, let's say this woman is maybe she's a stripper or a sex worker or something like that. And then I know some women or adult actresses who date bisexual men who don't get jealous of the fact that she's with other men. And is this a workaround that is a viable workaround?
Yeah. Great questions. And I haven't studied these phenomena, but I'm going to put them on my list.
Yes.
They're fascinating to explore.
Absolutely. Fantastic. You talked about male overperception bias. There's also female underperception bias, where women find themselves less attractive than they are. Was that also part?
The underperception bias, sorry, I'm dealing with my puppy here who wants to.
Oh, well, listen, we can see the puppy. That's fine.
Okay, here, come here. Come here. Here, come here.
I thought it was a cat. Is that a black cat? I thought it was a black cat. That's a puppy. Okay.
It's a border collie.
Beautiful. That's amazing.
She's wonderful. So female underperception bias is that what we found in our study was like a speed dating lab study where men and women interacted with each other and said, how interested are you in this other person? How interested do you think they are in you? And what we found is that women underestimated the degree to which men were sexually attracted to them, which is really, it was a novel finding. We didn't predict it in advance.
It's stunning.
But it's kind of interesting because, and I have two hypotheses that I have speculated about as to why this occurs. Okay, one is that men, let's get back to an earlier point that we talked about in our conversation, which is that men who are pursuing a strictly sexual relationship do not give off explicit signals that they're pursuing an explicitly sexual relationship. That is, they give off cues to long-term mating as a deceptive strategy. And so it may be that these guys are basically concealing the fact that they are so sexually interested in this particular woman. And so women aren't getting the cues of sexual interest. And so they might be interpreting it, under-perceiving the sexual interest from the guys because the guys are concealing it. But a second hypothesis is that it's a defense that women use to deflect unwanted sexual attention.
Yes.
That is, by literally not seeing it, then they don't have to respond to it or react to it. And attractive women, as you know, they do get unwanted sexual attention.
Yes.
And so attractive women have this problem of having to deflect the sexual attention from most of the guys who are interested in them. And so those are the two leading hypotheses in my mind about this female sexual underperception bias.
It's interesting you bring that up. So one of my closest friends is a playmate. She's a Playboy model named Kindly Myers, and she is married. She's been with the same guy for 10 years. We're just friends, completely platonic. But yet she is probably the best wingman I've ever had in my entire life. She introduces me to girls, and it's unbelievable. But in the case with Kindly, she is constantly telling me stories about having to go to photo shoots and things like that, and like the incredible amount of like the way people just hit on her overtly, and how she has to deflect it. And she's become very good at being like, "Oh, I had no idea that's what was going on. Hey, we're just friends." And it almost becomes like a special ability. Another friend of mine, CJ Sparks, the same way. Is another playmate. She is a situation where she's constantly having to deflect this attention from men, and to the point where it's become a mechanism in order for her to like just get along, you know. And I don't want to get too far into the whole thing, but it's just like the way that men. We talked before about having female friends. The way that men hit on women is part of the reason why this whole Me Too movement happened in the first place, was because there were people like, when you consider what Matt Lauer or Charlie Rose or some of these other individuals, they didn't know how else to interact around women because they didn't have a lot of female friends. And so they start doing things like being really inappropriate around them. And we've gotten into a situation now where we have men that just do this because they don't understand how to have like normal relationships with the opposite sex. So that's another thing. There's another thing why I loved the conversations that you had with Dr. Cindy Meston. You guys collaborated to write a book together, and that thing all seemed really awesome to me.
Yeah, because I mean, and this is for my new book. I mean, what my hope is that it will reduce conflict between the sexes.
Yes.
In part by understanding the sexual psychology of the other sex. So, I hope the book serves that purpose.
So when men behave badly, which is that's the title of the book, you do go into that quite a bit, where you talk about different things. Can you talk about some of the findings that you found from that book specifically? You know, after the Evolution of Desire, some of the landmark findings from that book.
Yeah, well, one has to do with the sexual harassment,
yes,
you know, and the predictors of which men sexually harass women. And this is a thing, and this is why I hope, and I think so far it's been successful, that the book is not misinterpreted as a male bashing book, because it's not.
Well, I will tell you, I have interpreted it that way, but there are some people who do see it that way because of the title. I can definitely see that as being an issue. And I actually told my friends, I was like, the book is titled "When Men Behave Badly," but it's also when women behave badly, because you do go over certain things about women only seeing men for status and physical attractiveness and height. So I do think you give both sides their due as far as, dualistic mating strategies or hypocrisy.
Yeah. So well, and also that it's I think most men do not approve of sexual harassment in the workplace or forcing women to have sex, and most men find these ethically and morally abhorrent. But a subset of men, so it's a subset of men who commit the large majority of acts of sexual harassment and sexual coercion. And it's the men who are high on the Dark Triad, combined with men who are pursuing a short-term mating strategy. And so the Dark Triad, we've alluded to these a couple times, but narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, where the high Machiavellian guys are those who pursue, and they're Machiavellian women too, who pursue a manipulative and exploitative social strategy. So these are the liars, the cheaters, the deceivers, those who view other people merely as pawns in their selfish games of manipulation to get what they want. So this subset of men. So it's not all men who sexually harass. It's not all men who sexually coerce.
Right.
And we now know something about the subset of men who are most likely to do these. The vast majority of these ethically, sexually problematic activities.
What were some of those findings? I remember some of them being like men who have more sexual partners or something to that effect. Some of the findings that you had as far as.
So here's there are a couple different issues involved in your question. So one has to do with the contrast between, and this gets back to even our earlier discussion about testability of the different hypotheses. So there's one hypothesis that's been floated over time called the loser male, what I call the loser male hypothesis. And that's that it's men who are unsuccessful in the normal course of honest courtship or seduction or courting and mating. That it's the loser males who are most likely to rape or sexually coerce women. And in fact, the findings point to the opposite of that. It's the men who are successful who are most likely to do these things. So modern examples, and to bring in the news, so is Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein. These are not loser males in the conventional senses.
Contextually, they're not loser males because of their ability to obtain status and wealth.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or Bill Cosby is yet another example. A slightly different example is Mario Cuomo. In New York. That these are not loser males, but they are males who at least have been accused of, and in some cases, pretty strong evidence that they have sexually assaulted or sexually harassed women in a serial way.
Yeah.
And that's why I want to emphasize it's not like if you have 10 men in the workplace and 10 women, that all 10 men are sexually harassing women. It tends to be one or two of the guys who are serially harassing most of the women. But these are not loser males. In fact, the loser males tend to be guys who lack confidence, who don't have the social skills, who might be a little bit on the Asperger's side of the spectrum, and so they're not very good at mind reading and sexual mind reading, cross-sex mind reading, who tend to be the loser males when they're heterosexual and interested in successful mating. So that surprises some people and also goes against at least this one evolutionary hypothesis, the loser male hypothesis, which I think is important because it again gets to that point that you mentioned earlier in the podcast, that some evolutionary hypotheses, they're falsifiable.
They're falsifiable. That doesn't mean this is. Let me make this point for the stripper at the Rhino who just got off work. They're falsifiable. That means they're testable. That doesn't mean they're false. There's a difference between the word false and falsifiable, meaning they can't, for instance, if we go into religion where a lot of things in religion are not falsifiable because they're not testable. The things in evolutionary psychology are falsifiable. And the reason why this is so important is because throughout our, all the way back to the time of Shakespeare, love is supposed to be this esoteric, ethereal thing that we can never figure out. And relationships between men and women are so complex that there's no way we can ever figure it out. And turns out there's a study for this, and we can figure a lot of these things out. One of the things I can tell you, Dr. Buss, is that women are not a mystery to me anymore. Neither are men. Once I started saying, okay, let's start with evolutionary psychology and work back to what we just saw, I tend to find a correct answer, or at least a hypothesis that seems extremely likable. Occam's razor, most likely to be what the answer is. And so that's almost like a gift that evolutionary psychology, I think, has given not just to a theoretical or academic world, but to a real world as far as like, why did she leave you? Why did she cheat on? What really actually happened? But sometimes the answers are not the answers that we want to hear, or the answers that we're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe that's a good note to at least end on. And I think this is such a fascinating conversation. I'd like to continue it, but I do have an event I have to go to.
Yeah, no, it's perfect.
But I think that's a great note to end this conversation on. And I hope we have many more in the future.
Please, Dr. Buss.
And I'm going to come out to Las Vegas. I'm going to take you up on that offer.
Guys, Dr. David Buss on stage at Access. This is happening. 100% this is happening. We're taking him on to Zook. Sure. I cannot wait, Dr. Buss, for you to come out here. Can I get two real quick questions for you? Number one,
sure.
Stubbs, Salt Lick, Rudy's, or what was the other one? What's the best barbecue in Austin, Texas?
I like Rudy's, but Stubbs is excellent. Franklin's is often touted as the best barbecue.
Yeah.
But I went to another one just a couple of days ago called Blackie's or something like that. That's down on Barton Springs Road.
Yeah.
And that's also excellent. I mean, it's hard to go wrong with barbecue in Austin.
And then the second question is, what are we going to do about these Longhorns, man? What is it? Sarkeesian? What's the problem?
I don't know. Yeah, it's a train wreck. I mean, it's really, when you think about how much money Texas has to recruit top talent, it's an embarrassment. Especially this season. I think we have a losing season. It's lower than 50%.
That's crazy.
I can't even remember when it's been that. I remember the Vince Young days.
Yes.
When we won the national championship. So hopefully we'll get back there at some point.
Dr. Buss, in case you're wondering, I am your biggest fan. So I'm very honored, could not possibly be more honored to have you on the podcast. Hopefully we can have you on again. Hopefully we can have you in studio. You're always welcome to come here to Sticky Paw Studio if you ever need to come out here. Dr. Buss, where we can find you at Professor David Buss on Twitter and on Instagram. I just checked. All of you are going to follow him on Instagram right now. Make sure you check out Dr. Buss on there. And then your newest book is the When Men Behave Badly.
Right. Right. The subtitle is The Hidden Roots of Sexual Deception, Harassment, and Assault. Listeners might be interested in the evolution of desire.
Yes. There's a rewrite. You did an update.
Yeah, I did an update of that. The subtitle is The Strategies of Human Mating. And also, if those listeners are interested in other things, like I've done, podcasts, but also essays and scientific publications, they can just go to my website, which is davidbuss.com. So my name, davidbuss.com, and that has all the information on it for the access to those other things.
Okay,
but
guys.
I would love, I'm going to come to Las Vegas. I'd love to chat further. I'd love to be on your podcast again.
Absolutely. Dr. Buss, I can't tell you what an honor it is. For those of you who have been following me for a while, this is Dr. David Buss. We're really happy to have him. I mention you all the time on the podcast, so it's really great. Please, for those of you who love this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure you follow Dr. David Buss. We will see you guys here soon. I have so many great interviews, Dr. Buss. I have Flat Earthers coming on, so I'm interested to see what you think about that. Would you be open to doing a debate with some evolutionists, some anti-evolution people?
Sure.
Okay, we might be able to do that. All right, guys, take care. Hook 'em horns. Hook 'em horns.
Okay. Take care.
Hook 'em horns, guys.
With you.
And I will see you guys next week.
All right.